Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, I have great news this morning for people like me who have just been in despair over what we believe is the onset of fascism in America.
Good morning, Vietnam.
And I have a friend in the studio today who has told me I'm wrong. He said all the stuff I'm worried about with the Trump administration, bringing its attacks on civil liberties, on freedoms.
Frei.
He's going to be here today to tell us why people like me should not feel like the sky is falling. Norm Pattis, the celebrated defense attorney from New Haven, was also the attorney for Joe Biggs, one of the Proud Boys, on trial for January 6th. Thanks for coming in, willing to be in the hot seat and challenge the orthodoxy of this station.
You know, Paul, at orthodoxy, schmorthodoxy, all I know is every time I see you, I smile for days. You are an oasis of hope in a desert.
But now I'm going to be doom and gloom, so get ready.
I'm ready.
You're ready.
I'm in the hot seat.
Okay.
My buns are sizzling.
Okay. So, Norm, for all real, and we did agree, you're not playing a role. You're saying what you think.
Wait a minute. I have to be me? Ladies and gentlemen, here's a trigger warning. I am a lifetime member of AA, and it's not what you think. It's Blankaholics Anonymous, and I'm sitting on it. I don't make
say assholes alert.
Okay, it's Assaholics Anonymous. I'm a charter member. I don't make every 12 steps every day. I'm often having to apologize for who I am. So let me apologize in advance for what you're about to do.
You don't have to apologize. I want you to tell me in all honesty, Norm, because this is by my heart. I am in despair.
Why?
I do believe that, and we'll get into details, I do believe that every day I'm reading about measures taken by the Trump administration that remind me of the stories of Hitler's rise to power and what they did in Germany and what's happening under Putin and what's happening worldwide, authoritarian regimes. But you don't, right? You don't feel like our freedoms are under attack, and you're a longtime civil libertarian.
I think something more fundamental is at stake than fascism. I think it's really a struggle against a struggle against the overwhelming efficiencies of AI. I think people are clamoring for significance in any way that they can against impersonal forces.
So that's a shorthand because it didn't begin with AI. So I think what you're talking about, Norm, if I'm not wrong, is talking about the mechanization of our society and the control of information in a way that is leading us, not our inputting information and communicating of our own will, but that all these mechanized systems that are now going to go in overdrive with AI are sort of directing us about what we're doing with our lives and atomizing us and not having have contact with other human beings in the way we used to. Is that what you're talking about?
Possibly, or maybe giving us what we want. Think about it. 1776. What was the most influential book written, or what was the most influential writing in 1776?
Thomas Paine.
No.
Oh.
No. Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith.
Oh, okay.
And what Adam Smith said was, he was an argument against mercantilism, against the notion that nations could control their own economy for the economic benefit of their citizens. His view was that in the long, broader view, that undermined global happiness because there was a mechanism for distributing goods and services that was efficient, and that was the market. And it came to be known as the invisible hand. And so the reason Adam Smith was in favor of the invisible hand was we couldn't manage all the data to do it ourselves. It's possible now that an algorithm can assemble enough data about what measures are consistent with someone's vision of human happiness to distribute everything in a way that maximizes global efficiency by treating us not as individuals but as digits in the new digital area, in digitopia. And I think that the Chinese are way ahead of us on that in terms of their social media or social credit scoring and so forth. And I think that
social credit scoring, does that mean when they rate their citizens and how much to watch them, or?
Yeah. So in other words, if you purchase the right things,
get a little closer to the mic, like bring it a little closer. Thanks.
Sure. If you read the right things, attend the right events, you might pay less for milk, or you might acquire the. Do
they really do that?
Yeah, it's called social credit scoring.
That affects the prices you pay at the market?
Well, I don't know if it affects the prices, but it affects your liberties. Mm-hmm. It affects your ability to travel. It reflects the privileges that you enjoy as a citizen, because good citizens are entitled to more. Now, I think that with respect to AI, the game now is that there are global institutions and global forces that can say, what's the minimum number of calories a person should have? What's this? What's that? What's the best for each individual, all 9 billion of us on the planet? And there's an effort to say, in the name of equality, we should all have what we need and no more.
And you know where the leap goes with that, obviously, is that AI, when it gets more advanced, they think of 3 years, 5-year window of superintelligence, that then it decides on its own as the algorithm to define the wishes of the person who did the input. Because I see where you're going with the nanny state and telling you what you can consume. But they're saying it's going to go a level deeper. Some of the people who are concerned that it's going to actually decide what's best for the algorithm, and it can get rid of human beings.
It could, but I'm less worried about AI than many are, and the first page of Augustine's Confessions tells me why. Because what does Augustine say in the first page, near the bottom? I will know no rest until I find my rest in thee. I think that we are spiritual beings, and if you can find a computer algorithm that's sophisticated enough to have a longing to know God, I'll think they're onto something.
Or to see in each other's eyes God, which is one form of love and one form of God. You know, a lot of relationships are being outsourced to the algorithms, right? A lot of, like, there was this fascinating, one of the date sites, Tinder. I was listening to this Hard Fork. You ever hear that show with Casey and Kevin about AI?
I'm a cultural illiterate. Okay?
So they actually have a training game for you when you're going to go on a first date and try to interest people on Tinder. And it was really
Isn't
eerie.
Tinder a pickup thing?
Yeah.
Hubba,
Hook up.
you know, no.
Yeah, but even when you're there,
Want to see my hockey stick? Well, I'd like to puck with you, you know.
But they played the game with what the conversation is like, and then they rate you of how your conversation is going to see whether somebody like your first date. So I'm even thinking, I do think it's endangered what you're talking about. I think what you're talking about is what we see in each other's eyes and our souls, and the meaning we find in life,
and the significance we find in our communities.
Yes,
and hence this is the perfect lead into your lightning round of questions
wait a second,
about Trump.
I'm actually a little more interested in this, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I was trying to
there.
keep you on program.
We'll
I didn't want to be
there.
accused. You know, Norm Pattis comes in the Paul Bass show. You know, promises one thing, delivers another.
That's okay.
That would be him.
No, that's okay.
Or he.
That's why you're invited.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, you were talking about you're not as worried about AI because you believe that our thirst for community and connection with each other as human beings, as souls, and in our souls, that, which I do also agree is the fundamental part of why we're here and what life is and our communal quest to understand our existence. It does seem like that's being chipped away at. It does seem like, with the way even human relationships are being atomized through tech intermediaries, through these platforms, through formulas. That's what I'm talking about. Even though it was a funny segment where they were showing us how this algorithm taught you how to meet someone and how to talk. In fact, what was eerie to me, I was hearing the generic kind of soulless way we communicate in that.
Well, and I think I don't think we pray enough as individuals. I think that somehow we were sold a bill of goods that God was dead and we could do it without him. I love Saint Augustine. You know, Augustine took the position that sin was love of the wrong thing, and that a righteous life was love of God. And what are the first two commandments? Love the Lord your God. God is one. Love him with all your heart, mind, body, and soul. And love your neighbor as yourself. And these, Jesus once
I think
said,
you left that you'll have no other gods besides me, which makes everybody kill each other.
Well, there is that. But I don't know that it does. I think love of the wrong thing makes us kill one another. I think we're defined by longing. So let me give you an example. You know, I love reading about AI, and I love the metaphysics, as it were, of it. If all we are is complexity, then theoretically it's possible to model us and to have another version of Paul and another version of me. And there are physicists who say that, you know, in an infinite universe, there is another Paul and another Norm doing exactly what we're doing right now. And one of them might actually speak complete sentences, unlike me, and use correct grammar. But, you know, the person who's playing me in a video game in a universe 7 steps removed from this one thinks it's funny to tweak me this way. And so people actually entertain that as a realistic possibility, and they mimic and mock those who say that, you know, we're alone in the universe because we are individuals created in the image of God, and we are unique. And what makes us unique is our longing to know our Creator. And our separation from him is an explanation for sin, and our substitution of one thing for the thing we really want and need explains human aberrations, human violence, this, that, and the other thing. Is it really so preposterous to believe that we were made in the image of God? Is it really so preposterous?
So you're doing you're doing the layups, Norm. You're doing straw man arguments here. Well, of course, it's not preposterous. Of course,
but many people think it is.
I know it is, and
then let's get away from the straw man. Hit me with something harder.
No, not something harder. I'm just thinking, I want to be as optimistic as you are. I want to know that the 72 hours I just spent without my phone on because of the beginning of Passover coinciding with the Sabbath, it did make me feel more human. It did connect me more with my family. It did get me closer to the quest of understanding. And I did pray, and it did get me close to that understanding of what you're calling the Creator, which I still think is a larger idea of why do we exist in that communal quest of who we are and how we interact and what's our purpose here on earth. I want to be as optimistic as you are as that's going to win out. Because I do see, you talk about what we want. I think people do want the convenience. That's hard. It's not hard once you're there, but there's so many distractions in life. And now AI is just, I think, the latest form at a heightened level of distracting us for purposes other than what you're talking about as our main purpose of life. And the distraction has gotten so severe that it's hard not to look at your phone because it's programmed to addict you to that phone.
It is, but as with any other addiction, you have the power to choose otherwise. And I'm not necessarily optimistic about the long run. I remember Toynbee's work on the history of civilizations. He said there are 23 civilizations that came and went, and now we're the 24th. And we may be on our way to extinction. But you know what? Today I'm sitting here talking to you. Mm-hmm. This morning I had coffee with my wife. I was in court in Torrington this morning seeing old friends and chuckling about things and sharing the gift of human warmth and receiving it. And I was nourished by that. And isn't that enough?
It's the whole bag. You just described the whole bag of goods.
But so that's still available.
It's still available. We can choose it. I find it takes more and more effort. I still choose it. It's like here at The Independent, we want to be reporting in person and have a newsroom. That's kind of an outdated idea. I'm actually visiting newsrooms now, and they don't all have newsrooms. Like
wow.
The idea is that you don't need to be with each other. I actually find the pursuit of journalism and stories part of that pursuit of who we are and why we are in community. And the way it's gotten atomized, the pandemic leapfrogged it with Zoom, but we haven't gone back. A lot of places people do feel like reporting is you sit at your computer, you look things up on the web, you email people instead of looking in their eyes and seeing them as a human being and looking for clues that are beyond the zeros and ones. And I guess with quantum, we'll get 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's, I guess I'm agreeing with you, Norm. I'm not feeling your optimism. I kind of, but you're saying maybe it's okay. Civilizations come and go.
Well, I mean, look, they do. And we may, but the greatest gift that I have received in life is the trust of others who are in often horrible situations. Somebody accused of
You're talking about being a defense lawyer.
Yeah. And, I get to see people at their worst, their most terrified, their most fearful. And, my commitment is to bear witness to what they're going through and to provide them with the best advice and counsel that I can. So no matter how far I get into my head, reality is knocking on the door at 9 o'clock the next morning. And the reality is human contact. The reality is the reality is prayer. I mean, I often start the day with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Think about what that means. It's our Father in heaven, my Father. Blessed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from evil. That's a way to start the day, because I really don't know what I'm going to see by the time I get in the office. And by the time 8, 9 phone calls have come in, I might be looking at an entirely different world. But I'm the same person. And what I give and what I get out of it nourishes me. And I think it does you in community journalism and in the stories you tell.
Well, actually, when I start the day praying, we wrap those leather straps around our arms and put like the space hat, about to fill in.
Yeah.
And so every morning some people do what you do with one sentence and really breathe on it. And some of our first prayers, but we do a shitload of prayers. Like we go through all this stuff really fast. And sometimes it's hard to focus on it because it's so much, but it's trying to remember. I see it as a way not to fall as short as I otherwise would, and how I conduct myself. Like we go through all the parts you said. It starts out with, it always starts with praising God and all that, but then it leads to the way what we're signing up for, and we're saying we're doing that we're going to treat other people right, and we're going to try to avoid.
And you're going to fail. I mean, I've read through the Psalms 3 or 4 times. But you try
to fail less than you otherwise would.
Right.
That's the commitment.
Well, I pray for, so I have, I'm an old man now. I'll turn 70 this year. And so sometimes I'm just so tired. That old, now I lay me down to sleep thing. So here's my version. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Please take me, God, before I wake of all the sorrow I can take. But if you choose that I should live, I pray your strength and mercy give. And so I think we live by God's grace. I think David in the Psalms expressed that appreciation for grace.
And
no matter how
you get a lot of it.
Well, he did more than I ever expected. Hey, hey, honey, Bathsheba.
You know, we start with thanking for getting life back. Actually, it's God who raises the dead. We're raised the dead every morning. We thank at the beginning. Our first prayers is when we go to the bathroom, wash our hands, everything. We're thankful for all the cavities that are working. That we're actually thankful that we can breathe and go to the bathroom, and that God has awakened us. They consider it's sort of portraying sleep as a death state from which you don't know if you're waking up. So now you have that new day, and it's the day God's made. That's in one of the Psalms, and you're going to start from scratch again, kind of.
Yeah, well, it is. There is that. You know, I mean, I might have had something to say about praying for all the orifices that work. But my wife and I had until.
But as we get older, we get that has become a much more meaningful prayer to me with age.
Yeah, you know, I'm just not going to talk about that. But
it's thankful. Yeah.
But my wife and I had a great experience. We got together with a rabbi to teach us how to read Talmud a while ago through a class that he offered up at the Shabbat in the northwest corner, and now we're working. You know, and I'm reading Maimonides now and going through the whole shebang with her. And, you know, it's not that I expect to convert to Judaism, although maybe I am, maybe I will, who knows. But I think what I love about that, Paul, is the devotion to realize that your life in every moment is significant and that there are choices to make and that there is a reverential attitude toward being and an appreciation of gratitude for what we've been given. I love that.
I love that, too.
Yeah, and I love that in you.
I love
Thank
that
you for
in you,
having
too,
me.
Norm Pattis is here on Dateline New Haven. We were supposed to talk about why he's not worried that we're collapsing to fascism. I am, but I gotta tell you, I kind of like this better. So when you go to court, Norm, you've always been a defense attorney. You've loved to represent unpopular clients. So when
Still do.
So when you were representing the Occupy New Haven people, they were your people,
Right.
and they even though they were far left.
They were? I didn't even notice the politics.
Well, I promise you, I was sitting in there. I felt like a Reagan conservative covering that. And then you covered the Proud Boys. To what extent does that follow into what you're seeing as your purpose in life when you're representing someone who you feel doesn't get a fair shake? And to what extent are you comfortable when you're representing someone you don't agree with, but you're helping them be heard or maybe even get off on something they shouldn't get off on?
Well, so, you know, Immanuel Kant once said that two things filled him with wonder: the starry heavens above and the moral law within. A third thing fills me with wonder, and that is the authority of the state. How is it that strangers get the ability to tell us what to do, how to do it, what part of our income to give, whether to live or die? And so I've always been puzzled by the riddle of legitimacy. As a kid, you know, I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I was an only child. My father
Was
left.
it Detroit?
Yeah, Detroit. My father
Near
left.
8 Mile?
Actually, I went to high school near 8 Mile.
I just was out there. And
7 Mile in Kelly.
I was learning all about 8 Mile.
Yeah. No, we were East Side, Lower East Side. And, you know, life was nasty, brutish, solitary, and short.
Often short.
Yeah. And there was no one there for me. You know, my father left, my mother more or less left, and I more or less raised myself from the age of 8 on. She had a series of men that she was comfortable with, cycle through our lives, and some of them hated me, including the man she settled down with. So I left shortly after he moved in. And
how old were you?
15. And so, you know, managed to get through high school, and the rest is history.
Where were you living?
Wherever I could. Sometimes I'd stay at friends' houses. There were times where I'd go home, but only after everybody was asleep, because I didn't want to hear it anymore. And I'd try to get up before everybody left. And then, you know, I stayed on couches and whatnot. So I did my time that way, and left Detroit as soon as I could.
And what was your spiritual frame of mind?
I discovered the New Testament then. And there was something about Paul's epistle to the Romans that just blew me away. You know, in Romans, Paul talks about that which he would do, he doesn't, and which he wouldn't do, he does. And I thought, yeah, that would be me. You know, and then the description of natural law, that somehow we know right. I no longer believe in natural law as a matter of philosophic principle. But at the time in high school, the New Testament saved me. You know, I mean, it's just what. And I started.
Where did you read it? Like, how did you encounter it when you were I'm guessing you're doing some stuff that might have not been totally legit to get by,
Not well. I mean,
Maybe not. Okay, maybe
no.
I'm wrong.
But for church, that old saying of Hillary Clinton: "It takes a village to raise a child." No, you know that, right? It took a village to raise me. There were places I could go. On Monday nights, so and so's house was open to me. Tuesday nights, I could go to so and so. And I had a big brother, from the Big Brothers program, and I'd go to his house from time to time.
Were you mad?
I didn't know it at the time because when you're a kid, what do you know? This is what everybody does, right?
Well, you knew it wasn't what everybody does because you're going to their houses and they weren't doing it.
I wasn't mad. I was grateful. We never ate together as a family. And I remember how surprised I'd be when we'd sit around a table at somebody's house.
That's the best thing. Like when I had kids, I said the one thing we're going to make sure is I'll be home to eat every night.
Yeah,
you see each other's face, even if you're mad at each other.
Yeah, and it was cool. So I think I started reading, and I became sort of a nerd. And I guess
well, you're obviously very, very smart. Were you a good student?
Not in high school. No, because we moved every year. So my father left the year Kennedy was assassinated. My mother sent me to live with relatives in Detroit. So I slept on a couch for a while. She turned up within the year. I don't know how much time. We stayed in a bedroom with another family. Then we stayed in a rooming house. Then we stayed in a one-bedroom apartment. Then we slept in an attic for 1 year, an unheated attic. And so every year I would change school districts, and nobody followed me. And so in high school, my mother settled in with a rod buster, a very violent man. He was so violent I intended to kill him.
Did you think you would really do it? Did you plan it?
I had the gun.
How'd you get the gun?
I bought it. Just as Detroit.
And how'd you learn how to use the gun?
Well,
or did you not?
I shot some pigeons out of the back window as target practice. Yeah, And so
what was your plan with the gun? Oh, what kind of gun was it?
It was a long range, a long barrel 22 caliber rifle. It wasn't exactly a blowaway thing. I wanted to use it for hunting too.
And did you carry it with you?
I had it in my room.
But you weren't living home.
At that point, I was. No,
Okay.
This was before I left. And then I realized, I think this is one of the things that, I ran away at one point when I was 13 or 14, slept out in the woods for a few weeks, got sick as a dog. And so I had to go to juvenile court. And, I talked to the juvenile officer. He said, "What's going on?" I said, "My mother's living with this guy. He's a complete asshole. I got to get out of here." And they let me go. There was no crime. There was nothing to do.
But they didn't help you.
No.
They wanted to wait till you commit a crime. That's screwed up, Norm. That's the problem right there of the criminal justice system with kids.
It is what it is, but it's what I knew. You asked whether I was angry.
Yeah.
So, this and that.
So if you had the gun, you were definitely angry.
I thought I thought I'd walk in and blow him away. I knew what kind of gun he had because I checked out his.
What kind did he have?
A 38. Snub nose. He kept it at bedside, so I figured I got to get him before he gets that because he'll win the caliber war. And then I thought, what are you doing? You're actually sitting here contemplating killing another man. And all your mother's crime, as it were, is that she's chosen to get what she needs. God knows she suffered after my dad left. We went bankrupt and so on and so forth. So if this is what she needs in her mid-30s, then I got to do at 15 what I got to do for me. And so in high school, I wasn't much of a student, but I guess I tested well.
But you were 15 when you were decided to kill the stepfather.
I was probably 14, 13 or 14, yeah.
And what was the day when you decided, how did you have that revelation? Was it a moment? Was it an opening of the skies? Was it an aha in your brain? Or when did you decide not to kill your stepfather?
Well, I didn't mark the calendar.
Can you remember a moment?
Yeah, I do. I remember thinking, if I do this, what will I have done? I will have invited all sorts of chaos into my life. I'll be back in juvenile court. I don't know what the consequences will be. I'm at the beginning of my life. I should go make whatever I can.
So you were 14.
Right.
You were
13 or 14, whatever.
You were still living at home.
Right.
So the gun, what did you do with the gun at that point?
I kept it and,
But do you remember the moment when you had that realization? Do you remember where you were or what sparked it? Had you read something? Were you taking a walk? Had you just seen something on TV? I
didn't watch television. I didn't have a television, and we never sat together.
So what sparked that thought? Do you remember any
self-interest?
I understand the analysis, but do you remember anything that happened in your life concomitantly that might have led you to that conclusion? Why do you think you came?
I was a member of a church youth group.
You were,
yeah, and And people were very kind to me. The youth group leaders were, and doors were always open to me.
What kind of church?
It was a Baptist church.
And what was the youth group like? How often did it meet? What did it do?
Every week. It met on Tuesday evenings at the Raisy household, in another house in Detroit. And Shirley Raisy, the mother of the house, had kids just a few years younger than me. And I'd always get there a little early, and we'd talk, and I'd have whatever she served, coffee. I don't know. Looking at my teacup here, I doubt it was tea at that age. It wasn't alcoholic. I know that. And I think my big brother's influence. He was a lawyer and an insurance salesman. He didn't practice law, but he ran for Congress out of as a Republican fodder in Detroit. And I remember, and I'm still friends with his son. He died not long ago. But I think seeing visions of a different way to live in other households.
So is it accurate to say the fact that you're going to this youth group? What was the name of your big brother?
Herbert Steiger.
The fact that you had this big brother, how often did you see him?
The older I got, the less, so it was 3 or 4 years where I'd go out to his house once a weekend. Once a month,
when you were 14?
Probably from 12 to 14 or 15.
So is it accurate to say that that's kind of what led you? I'm trying to get Norm. I don't mean to be a shrink. I'm getting to be more like a pop psychologist.
I spent 17 years in 4 times a week psychoanalysis.
No,
so
I meant what happened there that led to that conclusion. Do you think those influences are stretching the story to say the big brother and the youth group helped you think of an alternative to killing your stepfather? What that mean for your life?
Yeah, they showed me another way to live. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can get that. I never really thought of like having a career or having a job. I remember when I learned that, about the presidency and whatnot, the circumstances of my youth were chaotic. I'm thinking, what happens when he gets hammered? Who controls the nuclear box? How do you, because that's what people did.
Nixon did get hammered. He got quite hammered.
And so,
talking to portraits.
Yeah, I just, I don't know what the particular thing was. I know I was serious about it, and I know.
But where I'm going with this. Was there a religious, spiritual part to this?
No, I mean the religious question
that relates to how you feel now about this, the fight between where AI is taking us and where you think the human connection and search for God and meaning and community takes us.
So my religious question is a lifelong frustration, Paul. When I was in high school and reading the New Testament and going to church youth groups, I'd hear people say, God told me this, God told me this, I know God. And I thought, well, if they can, I too. I remember reading the story about Joshua wrestling with an angel and breaking his hip. And I remember praying one night, break my hip, show me. I
never quite got the hip part in that story.
Well, the violence, it was tangible. It was real. He could feel it, And so I wanted to know God. And that was the thing that I wanted most. I remember one night praying in my bedroom. I was 16, and I had my hands buried in my face buried in my hands, and I was crying. And when I woke up, there was blood all over my face. And I remember I must have had a bloody nose or something because I'm sure I didn't get anointed. But I remember wishing that that's what it was. You
mean like bloody from like not getting hit, but just a vein,
whatever it was. I don't know what it was to this day. And so, then I went off to college. Oh, so then, I get called down to the guidance counselor's office. What are your plans? I don't know. I got to get out of town. Well, you test really well. Have you thought about college? No. Well, you should. So they gave me the Mothers Club scholarship. They sent me off to a rehab college for a while. I learned how to study.
What's a rehab college?
Community college, and Eastern Michigan University. So I went there, then I went to Purdue, then I ended up at Columbia, and I ended up teaching at Columbia. So what an odd, unlikable, unthinkable
You started
trajectory.
that chain of events with the prayer.
Right.
Was that the start of that chain of events? Was it the same day? Do you feel like there was this woohoo, God heard the prayer and got the guidance counselor to send you on your way to academia and out of the misery of your home life in Detroit?
I can't speak for God, and his ways aren't mine. I'm open and daily ask for grace and daily ask to be shown what best to do with the talents I've been given and how best not to squander all that I've been given. And I do the best I can with what comes at me every day, but the larger pattern is I'm blind to it, Paul. Didn't Robert Burns once say, oh, would some gift the gift you give us to see ourselves as others see us? I don't see myself. I react to the world as a seeker and a struggler, and it's a struggle every day.
Amen. You're listening to Norm Pattis here on Dateline New Haven. WNHH FM 103.5 FM. Norm, It's Easter coming up this week. Wasn't it just Good Friday? No, Good Friday's this Friday. What was
Passover,
yesterday?
Passover.
Oh, I know it's Passover.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was Lent. And then Palm Sunday.
So it was just Palm Sunday.
Right.
Did you do anything for that?
No.
How does this time of year have to do with what you're talking about today? Don't make it up. Don't make it up. I mean, honestly, is there something that's going on in your mind and in your heart when you're thinking of this?
I begin each day in the office with the Daily Missal, Missal. Not the Daily Missile, the ICBM that Putin sent over to take out the Democratic Party. And so you get a reading from the Old Testament, a reading from the New Testament, and some readings from the Psalms, and yada yada yada. But I don't attend church, and that's in part because I don't want my wife to be uncomfortable because she's Jewish and I'm not.
But who says you have to attend church? That's one. If it works for somebody, go. Like I love it going to synagogue, but that's if it works for you. There are many ways to.
The Roman Catholic Church has very distinct ideas about the church, but that's a different.
Were you Roman Catholic growing up?
I was whatever was in the neighborhood. Yeah. Okay, my mom, God rest her soul, did the best she could under the circumstances, and with no high school education, and she was just devastated. And my dad was there one day and gone the next, and she was left with a boatload of bills and a whiny kid who wanted whatever kids wanted. And so if there was a Presbyterian church nearby, in one year I went there. If it was Catholic the next year,
you're always interested in religion. You always love religion.
No, I was always shipped off to religious institutions.
But but you went early to the religious youth group.
To say I love something, what do I love? Okay. I love to read.
Every time I see you, you quote religious writings.
Well, it's because I'm seeing you, for one thing, and there are very few people that I can talk to these things about. And also in the last 10 years, our conversations, yours and mine, have deepened, and this has become something that's become far more important to me as an adult.
So is it more like when you were a kid, and now as you're approaching 70, you're focused more consciously on religion in a way you weren't in the interim?
So let me tell you how I ended up at Columbia in teaching. When I was at Purdue, there was a philosophy professor there who was sort of legendary in the Midwest. People would stay in West Lafayette to take his seminars, and I wandered in with him. And we used to have to write weekly papers, and he loved my papers and sometimes read into the class, which I loved, but it was embarrassing. And I ended up writing a lot about Easter, about the resurrection, about a resurrected Christ, about the possibility that God had in fact intervened.
Were you grad student or undergrad?
Undergrad. And so when push came to shove, I was a straight A student and won all the awards for writing and all that.
You're a really good writer.
Thank you. But not as good as you. Murder in the Model City. One of the best books I've ever read, and it's written by Paul Bass. It's about a murder of a Black Panther in New Haven at a time when New Haven was becoming unglued. If you haven't read it, read it. If you have a reader in your life who you want to give a gift to, buy it and read it. But in any case, I digress.
That's all right.
But it's a wonderful book. You've got to write another one.
So you wrote about Easter,
and so
the resurrection,
and so and then it's time to go to graduate school. So I apply to Columbia and I write something about that. And lo and behold, on the admissions committee was a St. Augustine scholar named Herbert Dean. So the next thing you know, I'm into Columbia with a full ride, for a PhD program. They paid everything but library fines, and those were substantial, including living expenses. And then I spent some time beforehand in a religious institution in Switzerland studying with an American fundamentalist writer named Francis Schaeffer. So I go to Columbia and I'm thinking, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And I was overwhelmed by Columbia. I didn't have the education to prepare me for it.
This was after the takeover? Was it early 70s?
Yeah. And Herbert Dean was the vice provost when the takeover took place. He was still bitter about that. We'd talk a lot about it. But we read Augustine together. I read City of God. I kept in touch with Francis Schaeffer. I was offered a chalet of my own at the institution in the Alps if I would come there and study. And so I had to decide, would I stay at Columbia or would I go back to Switzerland? And I stayed at Columbia, and I struggled with the faith that I thought I had, and I couldn't find a way for it. I remember I thought of transferring to Union Theological Seminary, and I went over to interview there. And I interviewed with Cornell West, who was a young faculty member.
Wow.
Absolute disaster. I say to Cornell, I'm considering coming over here, and he said, well, fully half of our students are outside the Christian tradition. I said, well, what kind of seminary is that? He said, our class whatever wrote her thesis on bioenergetics and the feminist revolution. I looked at him. I said, I'm more interested in traditional problems like the nature of evil.
So, Norm, what did you write when you said you wrote as an undergraduate? You found yourself writing about Easter and the resurrection. What did you say about it?
So, with respect, we were reading Heidegger at the time, and Heidegger talked about being toward death. And the topic of being is a notoriously difficult one in philosophy. So begin with the largest question. Why is there a world rather than none? And actually put your coffee cup down, pull over to the side of the road, look around you and say, how did this occur? Why is there this rather than anything or nothing at all?
Actually, I saw that in the sky the other day.
And then, why is there a world? And then what do we do in it? And we die. And so our life is a constant negotiation with finitude, with the finitude of our existence, of the discrete character of our being in time, over time, and expiring in time. And that can yield a certain sense of hopelessness. And so what I found so profoundly relieving about the notion of the resurrection was that there might be a God in the world who cared enough for us to give a sacrifice, to make it possible for us to know him and to live eternally. And thus this solved the riddle of being.
How does that the resurrection, though? That's why he sent Jesus to earth. But what is the resurrection? I thought you were going somewhere with what the resurrection tells us about the hopelessness of impending death.
Yeah. Jesus died and rose from the dead.
So what did you say about that? What hit you?
I don't remember. I remember, Paul, this is an unusual conversation. It's not the one I expected to have. It's not one I have with many people.
Much prefer this one.
Understand, I'm an only child. I didn't have parents to talk to. I grew up hard. Now I'm writing these papers at a decent university for people from around the Midwest, and and I'm like, what's going on? But the professor loved it, and I wanted to get an A. And I kind of liked the attention. And so I remember saying something about, because the professor was struck by this, the possibility of life, of rising from the dead, of flowering from nothing. Flowering from nothing. It's a flower growing in the void, as it were. And he was struck by that line. So I must have done something about that.
I thought you were going with how each morning, like the way we say that every morning is a rebirth and the possibility to flower and each day can count. That wasn't where you're going.
No, I think I've struggled for a lifetime with depression of one form or another. And I think I was in such despair about the state of my being in the world, that the notion that there could be a reason to hope, or that there could be a loving God who cared for me, was just an overwhelming possibility. And I wanted to know that God.
We're talking to Norm Pattis here on WNHH Dateline New Haven. So in our finals, Norm, I want to take you to 2025. You were 15. You were 14. You decided not to kill your father. You had the influence religious groups, even though you weren't. Although you said you were discovering the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
You get a guidance counselor through Providence, sits you on an academic career, takes you to Columbia. You're writing a paper about the resurrection and the possibility.
No, that was at Purdue, but at Columbia I wrote about more mundane things.
Like it was at Purdue that you wrote the paper.
Yeah. And that became the genesis of my admissions essay into Columbia, which hooked me into the Augustine Scholar, which got me the fancy fellowship.
But you were taken, it sounds like, by the idea that despite all the despair you felt and the rough ride you'd had, that there were genuine reasons to live and to have optimism.
Of course there
amid despair. So how are you feeling about Easter this year?
Confused. I've spent the last year reading the Bible from cover to cover, and I've gone through Psalms 2 or 3 times this year, just to kind of keep myself grounded.
Which translation do you use?
Well, I started with I prefer the King James, and I can't remember.
I have trouble with all the Old English.
I love the Old English. I mean, nobody else does Psalm 23. Like the King James Bible. I picked up.
It's actually kind of nice in the original Hebrew. Yeah.
Well, if you can do that, I can't do it. I can't say anything.
He's more le David.
Well, there you go.
We sing it on Saturday.
I wish I knew that, but I don't. I mean, I am, as Isaiah said, a man of unclean lips. I am profane to the heart.
So you're feeling confused.
Because, you read the gospel according to Matthew, and it's one parable after another and these wild miracles. And you keep saying to yourself, is that really possible? And then I remember what somebody came to Jesus. His son was near death or something, and he said, "I believe, help thou my unbelief." And so that's my probably posture toward the world and to religious things. I believe, help thou my unbelief.
What does that mean?
If I don't know how it means what it says. I find myself consoled, inspired, and moved by the Judeo-Christian tradition. But I have a hard time believing in the miracles. I have a hard time believing sometimes.
Do you believe Jesus rose from the dead?
I believe he could have. I don't think that's impossible. And so let me give you Pattis's oh gosh, what was it? Pascal's wager. Let me give you Pattis's wager. Remember Blaise Pascal? Of course you do. 17th century famous French mathematician who once said, hey, look, I'm going to choose to believe in immortality and in God, because if I'm wrong, I go to hell and I suffer eternally. And if I'm right, well, you know what? Good. I won the lottery, so I choose to believe. I think in our time, I'll call it Pattis's wager. We are either isolated atoms moving randomly in space in an infinite universe where everything occurs over and over again, and it's absolutely meaningless. And as matters of mere complexity, it's only a matter of time till a machine makes us a cell of itself and we're extinct. It's either that, or we're created in the image of God. And Fermi's paradox, that is, why there's no life elsewhere in the universe, is explained by the fact that it's because we're created, not evolved, and we're created in the image of God to know God and to love God. And so I believe that. It's all the stories that are attendant to it that I find hard to believe.
So what does that mean about Easter? What do you think? Is that what you think about this Easter?
I believe.
Is Easter in your mind at all?
Of course it is. Yes, I read the Missal every day. We're in the fifth week of Lent. And so in the Missal, you work your way through the story, and so some of the gospel stories about the betrayal.
So how does Pattis's wager update, change, or follow through what Norm thought when he didn't kill his stepfather, what Norm thought when he wrote the paper that set him on the path to a successful career?
Thank you, Dad. I have no idea.
What do you think now compared to those other 2 points about the resurrection, about why we're alive, about immortality, about rising from the dead?
I think that life is an absolutely astounding miracle, and that none of us understand more than the sliver that we've been given to see. And I cherish each moment as a gift that I didn't deserve, and hope against hope for a better outcome than what I often expect I'll see.
You rest your case, attorney?
I do.
All right. The court rules in your favor.
Yeah! That hasn't happened in a while.
I thought you could use one for the holiday. Norm Pattis. So Norm Pattis, the attorney, I had prepared an entire show with a list of horrors of the Trump administration.
None of which are true. None of which are worrying about it. People, turn off the TV. Go give your neighbor a hug and remind yourself that the 70+ million people, or whatever it is, who voted for Trump had their reasons, and it had to do with cherishing one another and significance in their communities. Ask yourself what you can do to make them feel welcome in yours.
So that was what we were going to talk about and have some sparks, and I so much preferred what we did talk about.
Thank you.
I loved hearing your story, Norm, and hearing what you think. It's always an inspiration. And I hope you have a wonderful Easter.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody else listening does too. And thanks to Harry Dross, as usual, behind the controls, getting us to all sectors of the multiverse. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.